potentially leading to significant breach. The probability of such a major breach is less than 50%. However, the consequences of such a breach would be severe and result in significant harm to property and persons. A major breach would result also in parts of Erie Road being flooded, such that access to the village of Erie by road would be prevented by flooding. This would also preclude emergency vehicle access and other services to Erie Shore Drive and adjacent residences. Therefore, with the powers given to me by the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, RSO 1990, I have declared a state of emergency as this impending situation constitutes a danger of major proportions that could result in serious harm to persons or substantial damage to property. The state of emergency for the lands that could be affected include Erie Shore Drive, plus the low-lying lands behind the dike and those portions of Erie Road that would be flooded. On the advice of administration, I've also advised residents to evacuate from the addresses of 18416 to 17982, inclusive on Erie Shore Drive. Erie Shore Drive is currently closed except for local traffic. At any time, administration may need to close Erie Shore Drive to all traffic, including local residents, if weather and other conditions warrant such measures. In addition, today administration is giving public notice of its intention to ask Council to indefinitely close Erie Shore Drive effective March 9th, 2020 from address 18416 to the intersection of Erie Shore Drive and Erie Road. Council will consider this matter for voting at its regular Council meeting on Monday, March 2nd, 2020 at 6 p.m. With regard to the process of tonight, it's going to be it will be different. We will be broadcasting through your TV in addition to live stream. We'll start with administration doing a presentation from Thomas Kelly, followed by complete questions from all of Council in attendance. Then we will be looking for anybody that signed up for deputation to come up and ask make statements, but as well we're allowing tonight people making deputation ask questions. We want everyone walking out here tonight with as many questions as we can possibly answer tonight. So that's the process. As well, we're opening it online, so anybody that is watching online will be sending in questions, we'll get that answered. So if you're signed up for deputation and you do get your answers through all the presentation stuff, feel free to just come up and say, I've got my answers. But if you need any further clarification, that's what it's for. Note there will be there will also be community meetings happening on Tuesday in Erie, both in the afternoon and evening. So for further clarification, we'll have a few more days under our belt as well to maybe answer some more questions that we can't answer tonight. Now I'll ask Don Shropshire, our CAO, to say a few words.
Thank you, Worship. I also would like to echo the Mayor's comments about thanking you for making themselves present tonight and giving us an opportunity to share the information that's come before us. A special thanks to our police and fire services who hand-delivered notices to everyone in Erie Shore Drive last night, and also to the Erie Shore Drive Residents Association, who was also helpful in trying to get the message out. We really appreciate you being here. And let's be candid, this is not what we were expecting. We've been working for over a year and engaged in a lot of consultations with the community about how we could deal with some shoreline issues. However, information's arrived on our doorstep within the last several hours that significantly increase the risk to our citizens. So the approach we've taken is we've tried to get that information out to you as quickly as possible, and our primary focus is to protect the lives and safety of the residents. And we're hoping that the decisions we'll be taking are also going to offer us increased opportunities to make other longer-term decisions that will be beneficial to our community. So that's our primary focus today. We know that there are going to be long-term solutions as well that we're going to have to be looking at, as we've been discussing for the last year, but that's going to be after we stabilize things so that we don't have any sort of a crisis on our dike that would lead to a potential risk to your lives and safety or risk to your property. So that's the reason we're doing this, and I do appreciate you being here. We look forward to your questions. I believe Mr. Kelly's ready for his presentation, and hopefully he'll be able to answer many of your questions that you have and concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, members of council, and thank you to the members of the public. I'd also like to thank my team who spent many hours with me over the last day or so putting this together. So what we'd like to cover tonight is the following. First, to give you some background on Erie Shore Drive, a little bit of history, some of the history of the dike itself and its actual functionality, the engineering challenges that we're faced with, and all the variables that we're continuously monitoring as well that got us to this point. Next is the consultant recommendations that we've had some verbal conversations with him and the company, and that really has prompted this communication. We'll then talk about next steps, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, April Dike, who will talk about municipal support services.
Speak up a little bit.
Okay, we'll do. I'll get a little closer. So first of all, just the background. So the dike was originally constructed in 1914. McGetchie's Pond was also constructed in the 70s, basically. There's a total of 123 homes along the dike. 43 are permanent residents per the tax roll. So we're not sure how many are there year-round, but per the tax roll, there's 43, which is about 35%. There was a report done in 1998. There's been a lot of discussion about that report. And at that time, there were recommendations put forward by an engineering firm at a cost of $11 million. That proposal was not accepted for a variety of reasons, mainly financial at that time. Recently, we're all aware of the high water levels and the lake water overtopping the road. We first saw this in March of 2016, and we've been regularly monitoring that area ever since. The frequency of events became even more concerning in 2018 to a point where we hired an external consultant, Golder, to really offer us a second opinion. We have engineering team on staff with a great deal of experience, but in these cases, it's always good to have a second opinion. Golder is a worldwide company who have actually done a lot of work, even on levees in New Orleans and so on. They have a lot of experience in this area, so they've been very helpful to us. So we hired them to, first of all, do geotechnical explorations, but also to give us an opinion on the associated risks. We declared a state of emergency back in August of last year, and then today as well. In response to that emergency, we spent about $500,000 in 2019. So on the dike functionality, it was really developed as a flood control structure. And I just wanted to show, I thought this was very interesting, that back in 1910, it's not showing up so well, but that's the picture on the left, is originally there was no aerial road, there was no dike. What there was a rail corridor. And if you look just to the left of the bay, Rondeau Bay, you'll see that coming down, and it was essentially marsh area. That railway was in place to really move coal to all of southwestern Ontario from Erie. And back in 1920s, the decision was made to build a dike, and that's what we see on the right-hand side. That orange area you see is really the flood risk now, but that's what's being protected. And we have a dike all along Erie Shore Drive, what we're aware of. You see that vertical line along the bay? That's essentially the old railway line as well. So the concern is any type of dike failure not only impacts the Erie Shore Drive residents, but because of the elevation of Erie Road, it's actually 1.1 meters, one of the low points, below the lake level as of today. So if the dike fails, we not only have issues on Erie Shore Drive, the village of Erie essentially becomes an island. So that's very concerning for us. So what we're trying to do and why we've been so diligent on this is that we don't want this to happen. We want to put in all the safeguards to try to resist this as much as possible. So back on September of last year, I presented to Council on the state of flooding throughout all of Chatham-Kent. And on Erie Shore Drive area, I mentioned the following technical challenges. So last year was an all-time record high on June 22nd. And at that point in time, there was only 10 inches of differential between the top of the dike, which is the road, and the static lake level. So that does not make any of us very comfortable at all. And any type of waves that you would see, you're going to see overtopping of the road of lake water. That's a real concern for us, and I'm sure for everyone else. There's also the nature of the design itself, the dike. There's just a minimal amount of space for us to work in. We have abutting properties, private properties, to the south, and to the north we have a municipal drain. The shoreline is eroding at an accelerated rate. I showed a chart that shows it's much deeper than it ever was back in the 30s, and with that you get an increase in depth, which is doubling the wave energy, which means every time a wave comes in, it comes in with twice the energy that it used to, back in the 30s, which again is creating more erosion. The municipal drain, which is abutting the lakeshore drain, it was never designed to manage Lake Erie flooding. And what we've seen is because of that is that we have so much more water going into that drain. That as well is a big concern to us. And finally, the weather events, climate change, we've talked a lot about it. We've declared a climate emergency here in Chatham-Kent. We're seeing more and more frequency of these type of events. I was at a conference earlier in the week, and this is worldwide, and it's staggering how much more variability we're seeing worldwide. So this is the historical Lake Erie water levels. What I'm trying to show here, first of all, right in the middle of the page is that dashed line. That's the average water level. So as you go up through the lines, you see 2017, 2018, 2019 is at the very top, and you can see that June time period where we actually peaked. But if you look over to the left where it says 2020, that's where we are today. And that level today essentially equals just the time period before we declared the emergency back in August. So the bad news is you can see that it's already higher than it's ever been in January and February, and I'm going to talk about some of the forecasts going forward. So what are some of those variables we're monitoring? So first, what's really important is the lake levels themselves. So the current level equals, just as I mentioned, prior to the August emergency. Record levels were set in January, February. When this is now the forecasting models, we use two different sources. One was Environment Canada, and the second one was U.S. Army Corps. And I wanted to also thank Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority for their help with some of this analysis. But what it shows is there's a 5% probability of the lake levels increasing by 33 centimeters or 13 inches from now through June. Worst case, it could even go much higher to 48 centimeters. So that's, again, very concerning. Next is the lake ice coverage. So we had a little bit of ice last year, but in previous years, back in the 90s, I recall there were huge mounds of ice. And ice is very good news for a lake because it protects the shoreline. Not so good for rivers, right? We don't like to see ice on rivers and the backups that can occur. But we've had virtually no ice buildup to date, which means that the erosion has been even more scouring and more detrimental. The rainfall forecast, as well from the experts, is that there's a 50% probability of above normal rainfall during March and April. So that's also, again, concerning, which could drive up the lake levels and also the wear and tear on the road and the dike and the slopes. On the wind and the storms, there's three things we look at. First of all is the speed. Anything greater than 25 kilometers per hour is concerning for us. You see the number of releases from Lower Thames Valley Authority predicting that there could be a flooding event. That occurs usually when we see 25 kilometers per hour or greater. Duration is of concern to us because the longer the duration, the more water on the road. And then the direction. And south and southwest is never good news for Erie Shore Drive. Lastly is the road, the dike, and the slope itself. So the road and dike are really the same. The slope stability is that area you see to the north, which goes down to the drain itself. That is actually a support for the road. And what we've seen, and when we had our consultant out just in February, was they've been monitoring this from 2018. They've seen an increase in the tension cracks on the road. They've also seen an increase in the width of the cracks, which is really evidence that the slope is failing, and it's called torsional failure. This is the exact same failure mode that we saw on Talbot Trail. And I want to say on Talbot Trail, there was a lot of concern that we were jumping the gun on this as far as closing that road. And 2 months later, we had a significant failure. This is the same firm, the same engineering group that are now have these same concerns on Erie Shore Drive. So the consultant observations and the recommendations, based on the visual assessment they've done, all of those variables, everything we're monitoring as well, the stability analysis, the lake level predictions, the storm frequency, there's a 5 to 40% chance that conditions will render the dike unstable, leading to a significant breach. So that's very significant. And again, concerning for us. The short-term recommendation is that with a sense of urgency, that we will complete the following as soon as possible. We want to raise the embankment grade to prevent uncontrolled overtopping. What we're seeing is that with those cracks, what it means is more water penetration into the road. What that means, again, is the weakening of the road, saturation of the road, and gradually it just becomes an unsafe condition. Next is we want to move the concrete blocks and earth fill to the south edge of the roadway from the addresses of 17982 to 18416. Essentially, the blocks that you see there today, that's the area that we want to move forward further to the south. And the recommendation is that we eliminate the use of the dike as a transportation corridor. So because of the unsafe concerns that we have, that we would close the access to the road to the public. So just to give you a feel for what we're doing, I wish my pointer worked a little better, but if you look up at the top right corner, you see a small square there. That's where the blocks are today, and we're going to move those further to the north. One thing that does for us, it takes the load off the road, so it helps preserve the road, and then we're going to create a clay berm behind that. What this does is everything we're doing here is that we're trying to protect the dike. We're trying to secure the dike and improve the strength of the dike. On the left-hand corner, what you see there is a spillway, essentially. What is in red is going to be the new structure that we're looking at. The cross-hatching is the old blocks. And what we're trying to do, very similar to the principle now, is we're going to take that water and direct it to the various spillways. At the same time, we're going to bolster the spillways because with all of the water flow, what we're seeing is that we're having difficulty keeping up because it's continual scour and the volume is of a magnitude that our slope is not able to sustain it. So if you can imagine we've got all these variables working against us, and we also have a forecast that the water level is going to increase significantly. So the sense of urgency is very important here. We want to get this work done as quickly as possible. On the longer term side, we need to protect the embankment from saturation. The embankment is essentially the slope that's supporting the road. That's anytime, again, you have saturation that weakens the structure. We want to reinforce and flatten the north slope to enhance stability. So typically we like to have at least a 2-to-1 ratio. What we're looking at is flattening that out so it's a much gradual slope, and it'll provide additional strength to the dike itself. We want to reduce the flow velocities in the discharge spillways, and we can do that by flattening out and reducing the number as well. And that's just, again, we're trying to minimize the amount of water flowing over the road. Water on a road, staying on a road is never a good situation. And lastly, we're looking at potentially moving the drain to the north. We would do that this year is our plan, and we will come back to council with this plan. There are considerations that through the ZUZEC study that we could develop a new seawall, an armoring system along Erie Shore Drive. What we will do is we'll come back to council. We'll show you the cost-benefit ratios of each and also the timing, because we need to get this work done. So the next step is what we'd like to do is to close a section of the road. It's been done now, where the current blocks exist. Again, the addresses are noted, but that would take place essentially on March 9th. So what we're trying to do is to give residents some time to get in and make some, if they need to take some valuables out of their homes. And this is all being done with pending reasonable interim weather. So if we see a storm coming up over the next week, we may have to close this road sooner, and it's all about safety. And again, we're not only protecting the people at Erie Shore Drive. It's also all of ERIO as well. So it's very important. We also recommend that we evacuate residents in that area as quickly as possible. We will have municipal support services set up in place, and my colleague will talk about this on the next slide. The initial procurement of the necessary services, I would like to move very quickly with this. I know last year we spent $500,000. We're estimating just under that now, and that's to do that very short-term immediate work, and again is to really bolster the dike itself and make it into a safe condition. That's what we need to do very quickly. On the midterm plan, we're going to take the input. We've had 9 different public engagement meetings throughout Chatham-Kent, and that's the ZUZEC study I'm referring to. We're going to take this information along with the real data we have from Erie Shore Drive. We're going to come back to council and provide you with some recommendations going forward at a later date. Mayor Caniff mentioned the public information centers. We hope to cover a lot of that tonight, but if not, myself, my staff, our utility companies will be on hand. We have 2 sessions planned at the Erie Fire Hall on Tuesday of next week, 2 to 3:30 and 5 to 6:30, and certainly we'll stay longer if we need to. But that'll be an opportunity. We weren't going to have a presentation. We were going to have more one-on-one dialogue. So we'll have staff available to do that. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, April Redike now.
Thank you, Thomas. Through you, Mayor Caniff. So certainly in terms of municipal supports, what those supports will unfold certainly as we determine the needs of residents. And as has already been indicated, this road, Erie Shore Drive, will close on March 9th. So what we have put in place immediately for residents who feel they cannot shelter in place while they are getting their belongings and looking at preparing to evacuate, if you require immediate emergency accommodations, through this weekend for sure, they can call our homeless response line. And I have a pile of cards with me that has this number on it. They should advise when they call this number that they live on Erie Shore Drive, and we will make arrangements immediately to put them up in one of our local hotels here in Chatham-Kent. If next week, once you've got your things in place and you're looking at, okay, now I need to get out and I've got nowhere to go, certainly we do work with all of our residents to see if they have family or friends. That's much more comfortable. But again, if they have nowhere to go, we will once again assist them in finding some accommodations. Initially, for that initial night or 2, that will be in a hotel. And then for both of those, the top 2 sections there, we will then link residents up with one of our case managers who will assist them to find more permanent accommodations as these repairs are taking place, and we're there to help. I will say that we will also have case managers at those 2 information sessions in ERIO, so that anyone who would like to speak to a case manager one-on-one, they will have the opportunity to do that as well. We also have to be aware that many of us have pets, and hotels, some hotels are pet friendly, some are not. Some of our relatives are pet friendly and some are not. So in the event that residents who must evacuate have pets, we do have our pet and wildlife rescue on call already. They are aware of the situation, and there are 2 phone numbers up there, one for their regular business hours and one for after hours emergency contact if they need someone or you need somewhere for your pets to go. We also, for this weekend, because we are very aware that it's already after hours, we have case managers who will be available over the weekend to assist with general inquiries, whether that's regarding organizing moving, organizing storage, whether it's financial assistance or shelter Residents from Erie Shore Drive can access our managers over this coming weekend by calling 519-360-1998. And so what I am going to do is turn it over to Kathy Hoffman, who will explain how our call center will work over this coming weekend. Okay?
Thank you, Worship. As April just indicated, we want to make sure that we provide ongoing service so that when you call that you would receive a live person on the end of the phone for this weekend. So we've set up a series of hours to keep our call center open. Here's how that will work for right now. For this evening, our call lines are open now as we speak. We will keep them open until 10 p.m. this evening. We will open them back up tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and stay live until 8 p.m. on Saturday, and do the same thing on Sunday, 8 a.m. on Sunday until 8 p.m. on Sunday evening. If at any point in time we see a surge in calls and we're seeing people still having questions after those particular hours, or in the event that any conditions change and we need to be open for 24 hours on our call line, then we'll certainly do that at that 519-360-1998 number. The other thing to share with you is that we have had some members of the community call in already and indicate that they may be willing to provide some volunteer time or services or resources. If you are interested in that, or you know someone who is, please again have them call that same 519-360-1998 number, and we are keeping an inventory and a spreadsheet of the list of people who are willing to offer those particular kind of services. And so if we get into a situation where you need volunteers, we'll be at the ready to produce that list. Thank you, Worship. Yes, okay, so Thomas was talking with me about the fact that we have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service for calls. We do. What my point of clarification for you is simply that during these hours that I shared with you now, it will be a call center rep from our organization as opposed to our after-hours service, but there is 24-hour service if you needed to call after that time. Thanks for the clarification. That's all, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we'll open up the questions from councillors. So, as well, I can acknowledge that Rick Nichols is attending as well. He's he's a councillor tonight, I guess, because he's sitting in the councillor seat. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Two questions. First, on one of the slides it said close access to the public to the road. So is that what you generally see as local traffic only? So the residents obviously can go back and forth? Or not? I don't know.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think you're referring to the last bullet, correct?
Yes.
Eliminate the use of Dike, and the answer is no, it will not be open to local traffic. It will be shut down the right-of-way. We will not allow the public access on our right-of-way after March the 9th. And the reason is that it's a safety issue. Secondly is we're going to be in construction as well. So it's going to be a construction zone.
So the entire Erie Shore Drive?
Not the entire Erie Shore Drive, from the addresses listed, 17982 to 18416, which is essentially, if you, it's where the blocks are today, but it's also approximately where we have the high road and it starts to dip to the lower road. It's the area that we have the greatest risk. One of the recommendations from our engineering firm is that we need to do a better job controlling water over the road, and that's where we've seen that's the highest risk area, is obviously the low part of the road.
So for people familiar with Erie Shore Drive, which I am kind of, I don't live there, but would that be half of the road or 3/4, just an approximation?
I would say it's close to about 80% of the road.
Okay, range. Yeah, I am familiar with the up and down.
I can do a quick check with my colleague, and we can tell you the exact amount.
No, I think I kind of get it. Second question, do you know how many residents are affected by this? Like how many out of the number of residents? What was it, 123 or something?
We can check on that. I know that we counted it. I can do a quick check, but it was around 80 to 90 residents.
Okay, great. Thanks, Thomas.
And again, those are, I should say, residence homes, okay?
Yeah, that's what I mean by
non-member
residents both, right? Like,
And of that, there's a different category, which is permanent versus non-permanent, right? So the actual number of people out there is difficult to really assess at times. We've seen it, we think, as low as 6, and we've seen it as high as in the 20s or 30s.
now, for the people in the affected area, if they don't want to evacuate, they don't have to, I assume? They'd have to walk there, but...
So, Mr. Mayor, pursuant to the state of emergency declared by the mayor, we are saying that this is an unsafe area. People should evacuate. So, and there will be no access permitted to the homes.
So they're not allowed to go to their...
There will be no means of egress or any way to get into the properties because the road is going to be closed.
Will there be services like electricity and gas? Water?
Thank you, Mayor. I asked our utility companies to come tonight. Sorry? If you could come to the podium. Darren will address water. Is Hydro One here? And also Enbridge? I'd ask you to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. If the dike does indeed breach and we lose the integrity of the water main will be shut off from 18292 Erie Shore Drive all the way to Erie Road. That therefore would eliminate all the potable water to Erie as well. If that does occur, we have contingency plan to bring bulk water into Erie and set up a station there. Okay, we have a water boy. Presently he has a 21 cubic meter insulated tanker to handle the colder weather. And that's so people would have to come there and fill their containers with water.
But as of March 9th, if there's no breach, because I'm assuming it's not going to breach if you guys do your work, it should prevent the breach, then will there be gas, water, electricity? Well, you're just a water guy. But.
I'm just water. Yes, so as long as the dike holds and the water main is not compromised, water will still flow like normal.
And probably more importantly is gas and electricity, but that's not you. So, but
No.
thank you.
Hello, here from Hydro. From what I can gather, we will maintain our services depending on safety. So if something happens to the dike and it goes, we're going to have to, switch power off. We don't want to. But that's our position in terms of safety. So that's all I got to say on that.
Good evening. Thank you, Council. I'm Brian Chauvin from Enbridge, and with respect to natural gas service to Erie, we do have a proactive flood plan. If there was a dike breach, we would stop flow of gas to that area. We've identified valves where we can isolate gas. So in that case, if water came across, we would isolate the gas in that system.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did have an Emergency Operations Center meeting this morning, and all the utilities spoke to that. Just to make it crystal clear, as long as the dike remains intact, and that's what we're trying to do to protect it, the 3 utility companies are going to continue to provide services. They will do everything possible to continue to provide services so the homes would be heated, there would be those steps in place. Some of the comments you've heard this evening are, if the dike was to breach, if we were to have one of those catastrophic failures, then there would have to be a requirement to isolate some of those services or reduce them. But the intent is to maintain services, and all of the actions we're trying to recommend tonight is so that we can be proactive and take steps to prevent a failure of the dike. That's the whole reason why we're trying to do this, and we'll do everything we can to maintain those services.
Okay, that was the answer. Thanks.
Councillor Sakachi.
Mr. Kelly, is it possible to go back to the slide with the procurement in there, please, with the cost figure? So because of that cost, is there potential that we can just, we're not going to have to go through the process of bids and that, because this is an emergency situation. So are we going to just select somebody and basically get this underway as soon as possible?
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. And you'll give me confirmation on that on Monday.
Okay. And lastly, so we're talking about the state of this project. So if this project goes perfectly well, how is there an estimation of an allotted time amount that this is going to take?
So the immediate actions, I anticipate approximately 6 weeks. We're going to do it faster if we can. Again, weather dependent, it could be longer. But I'd use that as a good figure right now.
So I really appreciate the detail of this process here. So my next question is going to be, so everything goes well, this takes 6 to 8 weeks. What is the process after that? Is the road then going to be able to, if everything is status quo, be able to become a road allowance again, or is it going to basically be closed down for accelerated period?
Yeah. So during this time period, the next 6 to 8 weeks, we are going to be working very closely with our consultant to come to you with a phase 2 proposal. And it's not until we have that phase 2 before you, it's approved and it's executed, that we'll have the confidence that we can make changes on Erie Shore Drive.
So if I'm hearing this correct, once phase 1 is completed, it still doesn't make those housing habitual. There's nobody, they're not going to be able to live in those properties still after the 6 to 8 weeks. So this is going to be a very long-term closure.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If you look in the top right corner, what's going to happen is that the blocks that are there now, just off center line, they're going to move to the south. The road will be closed, so there will be no access for anyone. Though that is going to stay until we have phase 2 completed. That's what's going to maintain the dike until phase 2 is completed.
That's all I have for right now. Thanks.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And my compliments to the heat, hydro, and water guys, because I know, especially those hydro guys and gas guys, they never expected to be at a public meeting like tonight, delivering that information. I guess my first question would be, working on the theory that we're going to do our best to maintain utilities, and I think this is particularly for the hydro guy, the electricity guy, and I'm sorry, if the power goes out there, are we going to allow their trucks to come down and make those repairs? I mean, it's all fine and good to keep the lights, or as long as the lights are on, keep them on, but should the lights go out, what happens at that point? And I apologize to the Hydro One guy.
I might be able to answer that because I think it's about access, right?
Yes.
So thank you, Mayor. The road will be closed with blocks on the road. But what we need to do for that reason is to have some type of utility corridor for ourselves and for the other groups that if we need to do some maintenance out there, we have access. So we will, through our right-of-way, maintain a level of access for a given size vehicle.
Okay. I think that answers the question. Where are we here? Phase 2. How long, and we're just spitballing, ballparking, how long could it possibly take to get to phase 2? Because as I understand it, I mean, Talbot Trail, the next phase, we're looking at 2021 before something comes back. So a phase 2, how long could that possibly take?
Thank you, Mayor. So phase 2 will all be dependent on the solution we choose, and we have not arrived at the solution.
So let me rephrase. Will that have to go through the same process that Talbot Trail is going through with EAs and the whole?
No, it will not. So we will come to council, and based on some of the work that we're doing, we're going to try to provide, obviously, a solution that we can. Our goal would be to get it done this year, if at all possible. There's a lot of planning that needs to be done, though, to really make that statement with confidence.
Well, I think everybody heard you say that this year, if at all possible, but there's a lot that goes into it to make that statement with any confidence. So these folks might not go home this year or have access to their homes this year.
Thank you, Mayor. That is a possibility, yes.
That is a possibility. Going back to page 10, I believe it is on the report on this. And can you make this available to us, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it'll be on our website shortly.
Okay. Reading between the lines there, and I think most homeowners on Erie Shore Drive are of the same opinion. There isn't anything there that protects their homes or any mention of their homes or the property there. Everything we're doing there is to protect the dike, correct?
Thank you, Mayor. That would be a council decision. We will provide several options to council, and it will be a council decision which direction we go. There are many ways to move in a long-term direction. You can see moving the drain to the north, arming the shoreline. There's many things we could do. The Zuzek study will present even more, and that's a proposal that, again, it'll be a council decision at the end of the day.
All right, the emergency fixes, would it be fair to say there's the potential for negative impacts to the homeowners, or the properties, I should say, I'm not even going to call them homeowners anymore, negative impacts to the buildings when we partake and do the work that we're planning to do? Obviously, you said we're going to raise the embankment and alter the spillways.
Your actual construction work.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. So the actual construction work will be done on the right-of-way.
Correct. But things flow downhill, or rather back up upstream. And I'm concerned that anything we do on the roadway will have a negative impact upon those buildings. But, and I understand that this could potentially be something we have to do anyway. When the storms start blowing and the buildings suffer damage or a break wall fails, those homeowners won't be able to go in and work on those properties, will they?
Mr. Mayor, I think Mr. Kelly is going to say no to that. I mean, I think the answer is that the road's closed and we cannot allow access in. I think the overriding discussion tonight is about the safety of the dike, and that if the dike breaches, we have a significant catastrophic problem on our hands. So we're proposing to do everything we can to protect or to stop that from happening. We understand as well, and extremely sympathetic, and we're very upset as well about the idea that there's going to be homeowners who are going to be directly affected and not be able to access their property. So I understand that. We're here to discuss that tonight, and we're struggling with that as well.
Yep. I guess my final question before I make a comment would be, is there a recommendation? Is there a motion that we're expected to vote on this evening?
Mr. Mayor, there's no requirement for council decision tonight. We will have a motion for the council meeting on Monday night to close the road and to authorize the construction to begin immediately.
Okay. Ambulance services and fire services, how would they be impacted if somebody decided they wanted to stay?
Mr. Mayor, I will defer to the fire chief and the police chief to speak to this matter, but with the road closure, we are indicating that emergency services will not be able to get into those places. It's one of the reasons why we're recommending that people are not there, in addition to the obvious safety issues if there was a dike failure. But we're not going to be able to provide any municipal services to these homes, and including emergency services.
Okay.
Specifically, again, I would defer to the fire chief and police chief, obviously, to speak for themselves with regard to how they might handle this matter. But we need to be clear that, for example, a large fire truck is not going to be able to get down this road.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say that if the road is closed, it's a construction site, and an emergency vehicle cannot get access, we would put our first responders in a very precarious and difficult position to try and effect any kind of assistance or rescue in these circumstances, sir.
I guess my only comment then would be to the homeowners on Erie Shore Drive and the homeowners in Erie. I'm sorry it's come to this. I really am. I'm sorry we have to make these decisions. It keeps me up at night. I know it keeps you up at night, and I don't know what we're going to do.
Councillor O'J.
Thank you, Your Worship. The whole question about this road, in that picture, you're raising the road. So the road's not going to be there, correct? Like, it's going to be tore up and lifted, raised up, obviously.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the construction zone, that's correct. It will no longer be a road. It'll essentially be a dike.
Right. So I know you're mentioning phase two. Are you in phase two, basically, just so everyone can have a little bit of a clear vision on this? Are we building a new road in phase two, or is that a possibility in phase two?
Thank you, Mayor. So that really requires additional analysis, lots of choices. And if that's one that you want me to come back with to rebuild the road, I will do that, and council can decide what direction they want to go.
Okay, so phase one is already thought out. What you have up there is exactly what you're planning to do.
Phase one is the immediate plan that I feel we need to do to protect the integrity of the dike.
And everything has been thought out, excuse me, on phase one. Like, that's a for sure what you want to do right there.
I would say that's what we all need to do. And if we don't do that, we are risking the integrity of the dike and a potential failure. We need to do this right away.
But phase two, we have no real solid foundation on what we're doing yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that's just because there's so many options, and the price range as well is going to be important for council, I know, and we need to do some additional homework on that before we come to the table. There's many options available, absolutely.
So phase one is taken from the ZUZAC study, or not at all?
No. Phase one is strictly the Golder study. The ZUZAC study is more of a long-term proposal. Here's what we need to do over the next several years. You as a council will have a decision to make. I'm going to come back with information on the ZUZAC study, the long-term. I'll give you some midterms that we could do. I'm going to give you several options. One of the options, though, it needs to be clear, is that, again, if you look at that high road that's out there, I understand the original plan was to extend that the entire length, and it was not done. That's the level we need to get to. The current road needs to be about 4 feet higher. So the solutions I come back to you with will see that road approximately 4 feet higher, and that's to protect based on forecasts and based on climate change as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. Can you go back to the kind of like engineering kind of landscape image about the house, where there's the house and the small square? So because I'm not an engineer, and I imagine there are other non-engineers in the audience today, can you describe for me, if we move forward with the very short-term kind of emergency actions, what somebody would see if they're in a residential property, theoretically looking out towards what now is currently Erie Shore Drive? What would it look like for them as a landscape once everything is complete?
Thank you, Mayor. So you will see this current cement block, the current concrete blocks that are there, will be much closer to you. It'll be right near the edge of the road. You will see in the low-lying areas, you'll see that we'll be doubling up on those concrete blocks. And behind those concrete blocks, you'll see a clay pack as well for seal.
And then, again, because I'm also not from Erie Shore Drive, how large are the concrete blocks? Like if there's two stacked up on each other, like 8 feet?
That would be 4 feet.
Okay, so they're 4 feet. So would there be a way, if I was on the new clay dike, assuming we decided not to do any kind of new road revamp or anything, would there actually be a way to get down back to the property after the emergency phase one would be complete? Like we decide to go forward with this?
No, the road will continue to remain closed, so it will not be accessible by the public until phase two is completed. At that point in time, we have now a level of confidence that long-term we have sustainability of the dike, and then we can discuss what we can do with that particular area.
Mm-hmm. The concern I have in asking the question is, and I know we're all very much in a difficult position, but I'm trying to understand if the decision that I make around the short-term action is by default going to decide what happens long-term for those who are property owners in terms of the relationship between that property owner and their residence or their home or their cottage.
Thank you, Mayor. Your question is there any relationship between the short-term solution and the long-term solution?
From the perspective of, so it sounds to me, I guess you can maybe agree or disagree. It sounds to me like if we agree with this solution that's here, by default, we are now making kind of the decision about individuals' relationships to their homes on Erie Shore Drive, whether or not they can live in them.
That's correct, and that's why this has been very hard for us as well. We've had 3 closures, as I think everybody knows, Talbot Trail, Rose Beach Line, and Erie Shore Drive. This is the first time that one of these closures is now impacting residential life.
Right. And then same line of questioning, if you were to stand, sorry.
So
Mr. Kelly might trump me on this, but the way the question was just answered, I'd like to make sure that it's clear. The reason we're taking the steps right now is to avoid a catastrophic failure. If we have a catastrophic failure and that large area that was up on the screen in orange floods out, it makes any sort of future challenge to rebuild a road or rebuild access to those properties a whole lot more expensive and a whole lot more complicated. What we're trying to do here is it's literally a $350,000, $400,000 patch to make sure that we're not going to have people lose their lives or have some sort of a catastrophic event that could risk their damage to their property. That's why we're doing it. We think that's the investment we have to make. And as Mr. Kelly said, that's what we need to do. So that longer-term solution, we're still committed to coming back to council, revisiting some of the ZUZEX, proposals and so on, as we've been talking about for the last year. But we can't do that now. We really have to try and take the immediate steps, make sure that we deal with this immediate risk to the community, and then we will be coming back, as Mr. Kelly's proposed, with some longer-term solutions. But, doing this now probably gives a larger set of options as opposed to if everything's flooded. We're doing this does not mean that people can never get access to the properties. We haven't got the details yet as to what that's going to cost or what that would look like.
Right. Is there, sorry, I still got the floor, so I've got a few more questions. Are there any activities happening, again, from the perspective of where the residential building is? Is there anything that can be done looking backwards, like looking towards the lake?
Thank you, Mayor. There is one idea that we've looked at, and where there is access to the lake, again, one of our key objectives is to get the water off the road. So where there is access, where there is maybe a vacant property, this was a proposal we made back in 2018, you may recall to council, is that we build a ditch of some type that the water would collect and not go over the road, but instead go back to the lake. And that's something we're also going to look at as well.
And in the event, so we've talked about the catastrophic possibility. In the event that that would happen, would we be evacuating Erie in its entirety, just based on what we heard from some of the hydro, water, gas folks?
Thank you, Mayor. So your question is if there was a failure of the dike? So if there was a failure of the dike, if I could show you a video that describes it quite well, but you would see slowly the slope would disappear, the road would disappear, and once that would happen, you'd see tremendous flow from the lake. We estimate in the range of 6 to 8 hours that water would completely cover Erie Road. So this is another reason it's so important that we do this, that if there's a failure of that dike to get residents out of Erie Shore Drive is one reason we're asking for the evacuation. Let's do that now, but also residents in Erie essentially have 6 to 8 hours to move off of that property, or they're on an island.
And do we have an idea, if the dike were to breach, of how many acres of farmland would be underwater?
This slide to the right-hand side in the brown, that equates to 1,600 acres of land.
And then, sorry, it may be a difficult question, but I have to ask it. How has the existence of residential units along Erie Shore Drive influenced what the short-term strategy is? Would you do the same thing if those residential units were not there?
No, we certainly, that would give us one of the challenges I mentioned, is just we have very little room to move. If those residents weren't there, we would look at putting our armoring and so on the south side of the road. We would do probably a combination of the two, but it would give us much greater flexibility. And the situation I just described, we would look at any overflows would be feeding back to the lake as well. So it would give us much greater flexibility than we have today.
And you mentioned in your presentation, projections of the lake being much higher. I think 13 inches is the potential for the increase in the lake levels. How confident are we that the $450,000 fix is going to be a fix that's long enough for us to get to whatever phase 2 looks like?
Thank you, Mayor. So the level of confidence is such that it all depends on what the weather event is. And we have not really had a real severe storm in the last year or more. And that is something that I feel by probabilities is going to occur. So it all depends on the magnitude of the storm. What we've seen over the last year has just been wind events, essentially, with some rain at times. So I would answer that to say we are definitely in much better shape to do this work now. It will definitely increase the strength of the dike itself and put us in a much better position. But like the storms that you saw in Louisiana and so on, these are man-made structures, and Mother Nature can be very strong at times. So I don't think there's any structure we can build that would give us 100% confidence.
It's too bad the probability can't be for the fix as much as it is for the risk. That would be helpful, but understood. And then my last question, how are we currently engaging with higher levels of government to talk about what our options are, both for the short-term fix and long-term?
Thank you, Worship. We'll take that one. As a starting point, I think it's important to acknowledge that MPP Rick Nichols is here with us today. We've also had MP Dave Epp present at a number of our consultations with the ZUZAC study. There is no magic pot of money that's been identified so far that's going to provide our fix. The commitment that we made when we brought this issue forward to the senior levels of government is that we have this huge problem that is beyond the means of just the municipality. And remember, we're talking tonight about one stretch of road that's, a few kilometers long. We have other road closures on Rose Beach Line and on Highway 3, and so collectively it's about $1 billion problem. So when we're looking at these structures, we're definitely trying to deal with what we have to tonight for the reasons we've discussed, but we're also we have to discuss it in the context of that 90 kilometers of shoreline. So we're raising that with the government. We don't have a solution yet, but they have been at the table. They are considering it. I don't know if MPP Nichols would like to offer any additional comments, but we brought it to their attention. We just don't have a solution yet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Shropshire. Our government is aware of the situation right now because I know that we've been in close contact with the municipality with regards to the issues and challenges that our community is being faced with right now. We do have a team that is ready to come in and work side by side, with the municipality in the event that there is a breach. We also have some other departments that we are working closely, or that we'll be working closely with. For example, the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance Program. Again, though, this is a team, and if we recall back when we had this initial concerns back several months ago, they did come in and they do an assessment. There is criteria that has to be made, the criteria has to be in place for the government to then commit to any fundings and that type of thing. So again, it's right now we also have a disaster recovery assistance for Ontarians. It's the DREO program, and again, though, our people have to go in now that you've declared a state of emergency. Then we are obligated to come in and do an assessment. But again, with regards to the dike itself, my understanding is that it's a municipally owned dike. Is that correct? It's not provincial? Sure. So as a result of that, those costs, unfortunately, will be incurred by the municipality. But again, we're there to help. And of course, I have a direct line into several of the ministries that will be involved in this thing. And again, I hate to say it, but it's almost like a wait and see. And let's hope that we don't have to see. Right now, we're in the waiting, but I do appreciate, the contingency plans that are being brought forward, for the safety of our community. That's first and foremost.
So just a kind of final comment that recognizing that we need to do something, the $500,000 solutions are going to add up quite quickly. So, I appreciate all the answers and appreciate the conversation.
Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Thomas. Thomas, is the plan to bring the low road up to the same height right now in the form of a dike as what the high road is?
Thank you, Mayor. Essentially, that's what we're going to do with this fix that we're putting in place.
And they're projecting 19 plus inches of water rise in lake level. If that does happen, is it fair to say that most of the houses along the dike road will be underwater?
Well, certainly that would be another new record for us. That would be an all-time high that we haven't experienced before. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the wind events, the storm events. It depends on the construction of the break walls, etc. So that's a very difficult question to give you an accurate answer. But it is certainly, as the water level goes up, so does the risk to the homeowners, absolutely.
Yeah, this whole situation is sickening, but we have to make tough choices. And we have a responsibility as a municipality to protect the greater population, and I totally feel for these people. I don't know, there's only so much funding to go around, and with Mother Nature, she always wins. Those are the tough choices we got to make.
Councillor Hall, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. My question is to Dr. Dike, kind of following up on the putting accommodations in place for any displaced residents that are impacted by this. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about what that policy is and talk about the financial assistance and what financial assistance is there for these residents if they're for accommodations, and how long is that in place for them?
So through you, Mayor, thank you, Councillor Hall, for the question. So probably the short answer to that is it depends. So certainly what we have in place in terms of looking at our shelter solutions are for emergency accommodations. So we will assist residents who have nowhere else to go. So what we will do is our case managers will work with individuals to determine, is there somewhere else that they can go to? Do they have a secondary residence? Do they have family who have space where they can go? If all of that is no, then certainly we will help them in terms of some temporary accommodations in a hotel, like I indicated. And then our case managers will then work with those individuals to get them out of that hotel as quickly as possible. It is not comfortable to be with a family in a hotel for very long. So what that looks like will depend on individual families. And every single family will have a different financial circumstance. And so our case managers will assess that, work with the families, and some families will have the means and the financial means to find alternative accommodations. They might just need assistance with our case managers who have access to all of the vacancies and all the properties that are available right now. They might have financial means, but they need assistance in terms of what am I going to do with my stuff and where am I going to put my stuff and how am I going to get it moved quickly. So as I indicated, we will have case managers at both of those information sessions on Tuesday who will be able to work family by family, residence by residence, and assess them very quickly in terms of indicating what we are able to do in terms of whether that's financial support, whether that's accommodation support, whether it's just providing them with the information so that they can move quickly and get their belongings out and find a safe place to stay while this construction is happening. So that's a long way of saying it depends on the family for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Thomas and his team, April and your team, the EMS for all being here, the members of the utilities, and also to Councillor Sakachi and Thompson and Harrigan and Pinsino, who've asked very difficult questions, of which your team has responded as well as we can. That being said, it's all very small comfort to those homeowners and property owners that are here tonight. So I don't know whether this is appropriate or not, but one issue that's not been raised at all is that we have taxes due on March 1st. So I would like to make the motion that at least we can waive the tax deadlines for those homeowners that are affected by this, at least in the short term.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. It is our plan, because of the situation, to waive the taxes for the remainder of the year on those properties. When those are proposed addresses up on the screen, but once we know the final determination of where those barricades are, will be our proposal to waive the taxes from March 1st to the end of the year as a start, and then we'll see where we're at for future years.
Thank you.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I would like to echo Councillor Latimer's appreciation for all the staff, utilities, for doing all that they've done. I think the presentation to me was very informative and really gave me an understanding. I've been around a long time, and we've had a lot of difficult issues, but this has to be the biggest issue which affects people's lives, their properties, and I don't think we've ever had anything as severe as this before. I feel for the people involved. I wish we had a magic wand that we could wave over the issue and make everything better, but we just don't have that. But I do feel for you, and I'm sure that Thomas and his team and council will look at the issues very earnestly, and will probably, hopefully, make the best decisions that are there to be made. So,
Councillor Sakaji.
Sir, I just wanted to add a couple of things. Like, this isn't just an inconvenience, of a road closure. This is definitely going to impact these residents' lives and maybe their life. And my concern is, Thomas, is that you guys have a very good team in place, and I appreciate what you have to do. I know there's a lot of things that you don't have a choice in, but one thing that we have a choice in is when we're out there to do the best we can to mitigate some kind of float back into to the lake, so these houses aren't going to be flooded. If they're not going to be able to get there for months and months, you know, what's going to happen when you build this road up? What's going to happen when these blocks are in place? If we get that big storm, they're not able to get to their properties to mitigate any damages whatsoever. What's going to happen? Is there a way that you guys, when you're doing the engineering, that's going to take these people's property into consideration, because they can't right now? And I think that that's something that's very important, because these people, you know, this isn't, for a lot of these people, it's not a luxury of living by the water. This is their homes. This is their lives. And I think that we're in a position that we have to at least do what we can to try to come up with a, you know, when we're doing this phase one, to ensure that we're doing whatever we can so they don't get flooded. Is that going to be taken into consideration when you're, you know, the spillways you had before? You know, you try to you know, ensure that the water went in the most you know, stable position. Is that going to be taken in place? Because when everybody knows, and I'm definitely not an engineer, but if you have the end point here, the lake's here, and the house is in between, if that water is getting in there, there's no way for it to go besides staying around the houses. If we get that ice build up, because I was out there 2 weeks ago when we had that storm, that water cannot get away. So, you know, if that water comes like that and it can't get away and there's more of it, the utilities, are, you know, potentially will be off. You know, there's nothing there at all. They can't put a pump anywhere. So, I mean, is that going to be, at least, can you guys take that into consideration, or is that just something that you just can't do?
Thank you, Mayor. Absolutely, we will look at all options. It is private property, so we will have to work through a process where we have to gain access to the private property. For example, if we saw an opportunity, a low-lying area, a lot of water accumulation, we came up with a design that could exit that water directly into the lake. We're going to look at that. We'll have to, obviously, because that work is on private property, we would have to either expropriate or work with the landowner to say, we want to make some significant changes. There's going to be a benefit to you for us to do this. But it's certainly our goal to, first of all, is to stabilize the dike. That's very, very important because if we don't, none of the properties will be saved long term. So we have to maintain the dike. And then the second case would be that we look at how do we move water as much as we can with the respect to the homeowners.
And I really appreciate that. It's just, even if there's a way that you can work with Mr. Norton, if it's the case, like, you know, these people, it is private property, but they're not going to be able to do anything, any type of mitigation efforts whatsoever. They have a week, basically, to pick up their stuff and go. So they can't put anything in the meantime. So I'm sure we have a very smart team here. I'm hoping that there can be some kind of maybe, you know, letter of understanding that says, you know, if we can do this to mitigate some challenges, to drain some water, I really hope that you take in consideration that. And I know that you know, in speaking to you, you know, that this isn't an easy decision. It's not. It's horrible. But I want to make sure that after phase one, that there's at least the hope that these folks have something to go home to. So I really hope that you do your best to ensure that there is something left at the end of the day. So I appreciate all your work that you've put in so far.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to all the questions and the answers, and I'm thinking about our neighbors in Newfoundland and what they did after 9/11. And I'm wondering, as a question to you, April, whether your staff would have the capacity to be able to take calls from local residents who do have accommodation that they might be able to offer to some of these folks who are going to be put out of their homes for a period of time.
Through you, Mayor Caniff, thank you for the question, Councillor Kirkwood-White. What we have in place is through 519-360-1998. Our customer service reps are manned already to be able to begin taking calls from citizens throughout the community, whether they are willing to assist with some volunteer time to help some folks pack stuff up and move, or whether they are willing to assist in terms of accommodations, any number of things, and they will be keeping track of that. And then as we begin to meet with residents, if we are able to do some of those matches, we will certainly look at doing that.
Your Worship, we've already received some offers of assistance. So as hard as this is, I think what Councillor Kirkwood-White's saying is the community is already starting to mobilize to help support one another. We're facing this gigantic challenge, but people are trying to step up and see how they can actually help contribute. So Kathy and her team have already got things in place where we can start covering that, and we will be reaching out to local businesses as well to see what other types of support can be offered. So that was already on our radar, and we're already looking at that, but thank you for raising it.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you. I was very pleased to hear Councillor Sakachi's most recent question with regard to our homeowners going to be able to continue an open dialogue with our staff with regard to setting up some mitigation creative system in their homes or their properties. I was wondering if somebody could give us some information about security, because once they're after March 9th, there won't be anybody there. Do we have a plan as to how we are securing the area, and at what cost and whose cost?
Thank you, Worship. That issue was raised, and I'll start and invite Chief Khan to add some additional comments, but we did raise that as we expected that would be a concern for residents. The police have indicated the level of support that they can provide. Given that we might have this ongoing event for, somewhere in the order of 6 weeks for a construction period, we recognize people are going to want to have their property safeguarded. So we will be looking into some sort of a security service or some support so we could actually have some monitoring of the area and give some comfort to the residents that would not be in their properties, that they're being secured and they're being monitored. Pardon me? At the present time, we would expect that would be borne by the municipality. But to be frank, we are coming out of the gate in less than 2 days with as much information as we can to try and deal with life safety issues. We recognize, and that's on the radar, that we have to deal with that as well. But I'd rather have a conversation about, first of all, how we're going to get people out of harm's way, so we don't start talking about having to bury someone. And seriously, that's sort of the level of priorities we're setting. And I'm hoping very quickly we can get to a point where we're saying, great, how soon can we get back in? How soon can we mitigate? How soon can we deal with some of these other issues? But I thank you for raising them. That is on the radar screen right now. I'm not sure if Chief Khan would like to add any additional comments, but the security is something we're looking at. We know that's going to be a concern.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of council. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor. From a policing perspective, and certainly in respect to property issues, we conducted an analysis for calls for service, certainly surrounding the property in the area that is going to be affected. Property crime, obviously, is very minimal in that area. Over the last 2 months, we took a look at the village of Erie proper, and we also took a look at the calls for service on Erie Shore Drive. Over the last 2 months, Erie Shore Drive, we've responded to 8 calls for service, 7 of which we created, that being police. And we created them in regards to monitoring of water flooding over that roadway for Mr. Kelly, and 6 of the other calls for service were basically just property checks, ensuring cottages were secure. Also taking a look at the people that would target these sort of areas. So, for example, our chronic or recidivist offenders, they concentrate their efforts in primarily Chatham proper, Wallaceburg, certainly not out in that area, in the rural area, obviously, not too much property out there. And if this, God forbid, does occur, there will be a natural barrier there for them to have to circumvent to try to get around to access that property. That being said, I would advise citizens to obviously secure their belongings, take whatever they can with them, and target harden their properties. And what I mean by that is lock all your doors, all your windows, and take some of that responsibility on yourself as well. In addition, I would remind people to please obey the road closures. And for those people who are not directly affected by this but live in the immediate surrounding area, be vigilant.
And what I mean by that is if you see something, then say something. Contact us, and we will investigate appropriately.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question was answered.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak twice. A couple of residents who have asked me, Councillor Harrigan emboldened me. When we're talking about all of the work we're about to undertake and all of the frustrations and mitigations and futzing around with people's homes and livelihoods and houses and safety, it's political, it's rhetorical, it's to staff. Why don't we just buy them? Why don't we just buy them out? I'm sure, to be honest, most of, maybe not all, but most of the asking prices would be fairly reasonable at this point. I think some people are just looking for a way to get out. I know there are people that are there that don't want to be there, but are looking at the financial reality, and the reality is they can't leave, not without some sort of bailout. That's a bad word, but especially when we look at phase two could be tens of millions of dollars. You could purchase those homes. You could throw those folks a lifeline. I'd also be looking, quite honestly, to our provincial and federal counterparts. But at the end of the day, even if we're not, that's a political decision. I'm going to float it. I didn't think I'd float it 4 or 5 years ago, but I'm going to float it now. That is an option that needs to be on the table. To our staff, it needs to be on the table. Politically, this horseshoe needs to be on the table. And I think if there's any residents out there that are still hard and fast that they won't sell, I think you need to take another look at that if we come knocking. I'm out of conversation for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we're going to pass over to the online. Madam Clerk, we've got a couple of questions coming from online.
Yes, before we get to the deputations on the floor, I have 2 quick questions. One's posed by Bill Robinson. So does Erie have to evacuate as well?
Thank you, Mayor. So it's all about risk assessment, really. If you were a vulnerable person in Erie, I would highly recommend it. If, as for the same reasons with Erie Shore Drive, and you have to be aware that if there's a failure, you're going to have 6 hours really to get out of Erie. So if that is of concern to you, I would recommend that you also evacuate.
Mr. Kelly, can you clarify, though, that Erie itself would not flood?
That's correct. It's just the access out.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. I didn't want anybody thinking that Erie itself is going to flood.
But if I could possibly pass this over to my colleague in FES and EMS, if it were to flood, that's where we're going to have significant challenges getting our emergency vehicles there. If you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the event of a flood, we are currently working on the notice of 6 to 8 hours to clear Erie, and more importantly, the homes that you've seen on that map, which would be immediately impacted. So there are some homes within that flood area. So Erie would be cut off. We've no reason to believe that Erie would actually flood. But our main concern would be, first of all, anyone who is around Erie Shore Drive in the impacted area, and then secondly, anyone who's within that flood footprint. So at the moment, we have a working team of police, fire, EMS and engineering working up an operational plan of what we would do if there was a breach.
Tiffany Ann asks, what is the timeline between phase 1 and phase 2?
Thank you. So if approved on Monday by Council, we will initiate actions on the immediate plan, which again I anticipated to be 6 weeks. My team will be working with the consultant and Mr. Zuzek during that time period, and we hope to come back to Council with a recommendation on a design and also a cost. And per Councillor Thompson's request, I would also look at the buyout option as well and present that to Council. So that would take it's going to be defined by council then which option to approve, and therefore the timeline will be dependent on the solution.
Over to deputations now?
Yes. Okay, so we have 11 deputations. Again, if your answers have been, or your questions have been answered, please just advise. So we'll start with Mr. Murray Spencer. On deck will be Andrew Spencer.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and John Shropshire and Thomas. Thomas knows I'm a fairly optimistic person, and I have to say tonight you guys make it pretty fucking tough. So one of the things that I notice with this presentation is when you look at the cost, you're really not looking at what the real cost of this is, because those properties on Erie Shore Drive are worth, I think is it $20 million? What are they worth today? As soon as you block that road, what can we sell our properties for? So we haven't really looked at the true cost of what this is. And the major part of this cost is being borne by 120 private citizens or families. And I understand that we're protecting the greater good. We're protecting the farms, and we're protecting all of Erie. But the cost of fixing that should be borne by everyone too. And it has not been for a long time. So I think that that's something that has to be considered too going forward. I understand protecting the integrity of the dike, and it's going to be really hard on a lot of people, but 122 families. And we're protecting a lot of other families and their assets. So that's something to remember. And the other thing is, if you live on Erie Shore Drive and you're not a member of Erie Shore Property Association, sign up. Have a good night.
Thank you. Next speaker is Andrew Spencer. On deck is Gail Spencer.
Mr. Mayor, my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Next is Gail Spencer. On deck is Tara Cadeau.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, everyone. I'm Gail Spencer, 18292 Erie Shore Drive. I'm a seasonal resident, not year-round. My heart just breaks for the year-round people. I can't imagine. I understand the human safety factor that you're considering here. It's important and it's valid. But I'm hearing about protecting Erie Road and everyone's property except the Erie Shore Drive property owners. Many of us have done our due diligence and spent thousands on our shoreline protection that is actually beneficial to protecting the dike. If we can't get into our properties and do the needed ongoing maintenance and repairs to our steel walls, we have a repair we have to do right now. That's not going to happen. We can't get in and do these. So a dike breach will surely happen because our walls are providing protection to the dike. And if we ever get back to our properties, we will potentially have thousands of dollars of repair and work to fix the destruction all over again. How can you help us with that? I don't know if there's an answer. That might be rhetorical, but that's a big deal for us. There might be steel flying all over the lake in a couple of months, and we could have prevented that. My other comment is that the security of our properties, that question was not answered sufficiently. There's been vandalism, there's been thefts, and it happens continually along that road. So I would like some assurance that there is some kind of security that's going to happen to protect our properties. I think that's it.
The intent for staff when we're developing our plan is to provide for some security to the area. So we recognize that that's going to be a major hardship for the residents that are forced to evacuate or need to evacuate from the community. So the commitment we're making is part of our plan. We will be considering that requirement for security. We don't have the plan specifics in place today for the reasons that we already discussed, but that was discussed already at our first Emergency Operations Center meeting this morning, and we will be looking at developing a plan for that.
And one more question. What is the criteria for reopening the road?
Thank you, Mayor. So the criteria will be really completion of Phase 2. Phase 1 gets us to a stability state, but it doesn't give us the full confidence until we know more. And again, you know, what we're faced with is rising lake levels to a level potentially we've never seen before. We really need to get this work done quickly. It'll give us some level of protection, and then we'll move forward as we learn more and we understand what the conditions are at.
Next speaker is Tara Cadeau. On deck is Sean Panger.
So I'm probably not going to be as eloquent as as Murray and Gail have been this evening, although I'll try not to swear. I am very disappointed that we are standing here having this conversation tonight. And while I want to thank Dawn and Thomas for being as collaborative as we've been able to be, I am very disappointed that we're standing here hearing this tonight. And I appreciate the need and balancing the risk and potential risk, but very disappointed. And I want to impress upon folks, in case you don't understand, that this just isn't an inconvenience for people to leave their homes. Their insurance policies will likely be canceled. If their property is damaged, which we all know they will be, something that Murray alluded to, what you don't understand is that the people, many of the people in this room, the property owners on that road, are the ones that have bared the cost of protecting that shoreline for over 50 years. And many of them are sitting in this room tonight feeling as though, with all due respect to social services, because I understand there's only so much you can do to support in the short term, but they're feeling like you care more about the road and the farmland and Erie than you do about them. And it makes it really, really hard to move forward. I do have a few questions. I want to clarify and get commitment that between now and March 9th, you will not do anything that will impede moving trucks or construction vehicles being in and out of that road. People have the right to at least try and preserve whatever belongings they have. So please, when you're considering the speed at which you're moving, and I do appreciate that we all know that there could be a wind and waves and that may change, but between now and March 9th, we would really appreciate if you don't block the road such that we can't even get our stuff out of there. The next thing is, and Gail alluded to it, if we aren't there protecting that shoreline, it will be lost. There's no question. If you wait a year, right now, and many of you may remember me standing up here or speaking in the media when my property was damaged in August, not because I didn't do my due diligence, not because I didn't have close to $70,000 in a steel wall doing my part, but my neighbor's wall failed. My neighbor on the other side's wall has now also failed. I now have no opportunity to protect myself and my property and my investment. And some of you may say, well, that's the risk you take when you buy on the water. That's a very ignorant and quite frankly insulting perspective for those of us who have been shouldering the burden of this. So I know it is minimal, but other communities have done it. For those who, it's very difficult to get construction done out there, so to be doing something now between now and March 9th, if you already weren't on the docket, you're not going to get anywhere. So I would at least ask that you can provide sandbags and sand delivered out there so we can at least try and hold back the water while you're working on the road. I would also like to know whether or not the engineer's report that resulted in this emergency declaration be made available so that we can understand what it was that led to this decision. Because for us, this is a dire decision. And I'd rather not have to do an FOI request. It would be a courtesy if you would please provide that for us. The other thing I want to ask, and I'm actually quite disappointed standing up here, not only for our friends and fellow property owners along the road, but we feel like we had been really working collaboratively. We were starting to change the conversation. We, as a property owners association board that has met with many of the members of the staff and the council members, we always came to the table transparent and honest and absolutely willing to collaborate. While I appreciate the heads up on the communication, I would hope that going forward, you come to the table with the same commitment to honesty and transparency. Because when you talk about phase 2, we need to have an honest conversation. And even if that is about a fair and equitable framework for buyouts, let us be. I think we have proven as a group that we are willing to do the right thing and to work with you, and we ask the same respect. Thank you.
Next speaker is Sean Panger. On deck is Cheryl Mason.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Your Worship. I would like to point out right away that I am not a resident in one of the affected properties, but am a resident just west of the affected area. I'm a full-time resident now, and am also a member of the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association. I am also a civil engineer by training and operate a consulting firm in Woodstock. In respect to the short-term Phase A solution that's being proposed, I can understand from a technical point of view what is being proposed, and I would like to delve into those details a little bit more. During the presentation, there was some talk, and I'm afraid that I've forgotten the exact details, about flattening the toe of the berm, or of the dike, on the north side of the road to 2-to-1, the preferred slope, as well as doing that at the spillway locations to slow the water velocity. My question is, am I remembering correctly that that's a Phase 1 action?
Thank you, Mayor. So those would be both Phase 2. There's a possibility on the spillway, we might be able to do some things to slow the water flow. But when you're looking at changing the slope, that requires moving the drain to the north. And that's because essentially we'd be filling the drain, right? If we're going to change the slope and flatten it out, we can only do that by filling the drain. So what we would do, if that's one of the proposals that council would like us to move forward with, we would build a new drain to the north, get it operational, and then we would go back and complete the job and fill in the existing drain, and that would give us the area and the geography to essentially flatten out that slope.
As a follow-up to that question, I would like to know if the municipality owns sufficient property on the north side of the road to do that without expropriation or purchase of farm property.
Thank you, Mayor. No, we would have to purchase, we'd have to find a way to expropriate some land, most likely through the Drainage Act. We would do that.
I also have a question about the engineering report that led to this decision. It has the appearance that this report was received in the last 2 days, or maybe 2 days ago. My question is this a formal report or is this a ongoing discussion? I would imagine you've worked quite closely with Golder.
Right. Thank you. It's still very fluid. We met with them today. Our goal, and we'll certainly make the report available to everyone, our goal is to complete this next week. So this has just been primarily conversations and dialogue about the risks. We wanted to get it to the public as quickly as we could. It's our goal, and it's a stretch goal, but I'd like to hopefully have it ready for Tuesday for the PIC on Tuesday.
Follow up to that. Given that Golder has been looking at this issue for some time, what was the proximate cause for action now? What happened to create the urgency?
So I'm just referring to page 7. So the primary cause was the last bullet point, is that we continue to see degradation in the overall stability, increase in tension cracks were witnessed. Also, the width of those cracks had increased since their last time they were out there. Anytime you have a width opening, that means any water sitting on the road will propagate down through the road, weakening the structure. What next? That was the first thing. And if you go to the top of the list, is that we worked very closely with Lower Thames, and we saw that the forecast would be, we're again at record highs. This is the slide before. That's the situation off to the left there in 2020. So that took us a bit by surprise, because you would expect it to be more so to the 2018 level, but you see it's significantly higher than last year already. So we've got a starting point that's already higher. We have a forecast that says there's a 5% probability it's going to go 13 inches higher and even potentially 19 inches higher. That's what drove us to the concern. So you have to really look at the probability, not just today. We need time now. We need to take the action now so we can get the work done and stabilize the road and the dike. So it's going to take us some time to do that. So we've got those factors. Every day that passes, the forecast again says the lake level is going to go up, the rainfall could be higher, and we always have this issue with the wind and storms out there. So all of those together in that order led to the conclusion that we need to take action now.
Has the solution that's being proposed been extensively engineered? In this, I have the understanding that raising the height and keeping the water off the road is all good engineering practice, and that the installation of spillways to let the water that does come from the lake due to splash up get across the road and away is good engineering practice. The solution being proposed for the short term does have the appearance of reasonable practice. I will say that from the outset. My sense, though, is that this is still being developed, and I would like you to either confirm or not confirm that in the sense of, you know, where are the spillways going to be constructed? What will the elevation of that spillway be? What is the drainage pattern to get the water to that spillway? Do we have a drawing for that? Do we have plans for that?
Thank you, Mayor. So the spillways themselves were done a couple of ways. One is you can just go out there, and when we see water crossing the road, that's obviously a low point, but we went and surveyed the entire road to determine where exactly the elevations are. So we have 8 spillways out there now, and they are strategically placed. They were engineered to be in the location that they were. We also had the Miller Paving Group out there doing some shaving and changing the elevations to allow for the water to flow into those spillways. So short term, we're confident where we're at. Longer term, we need more engineering time and evaluation to come back to council with that evaluation.
One further question, if you'll bear with me, would be, am I understanding you correctly then that the spillway locations that are currently in place are the only spillway locations for Phase A installation?
That's correct. That's the plan right now.
I would offer some concern to that. There are no spillways at the west end of the road for a very significant distance. And if you build a 4-foot block in clay berm at that end of the property and water does collect there when the lake is 13 inches or 19 inches higher, you will trap all of that water on that side of the lake. I would strongly encourage you to look at further locations for spillways. I would also ask that, where possible, that you would keep us informed about how those decisions are made. And I would also, just given my technical background, if I am able to not exactly assist, but be kept informed, that I may be able to offer some assurance to the residents that what you're doing seems reasonable.
Can I comment on that, please? So, thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wanted to say we've been working with the Erie Shore Drive Property Association. They've been one of the most professional, proactive groups that we've worked with in my time here at the municipality. This is a really tough decision, and when you get this information, you need to act quickly, and we have tried to keep very open dialogue. We'll continue to do that. If there's other ideas like you're suggesting, Sean, that we'd be happy to review it and entertain it. One thing with all engineering solutions is that, for example, I have a total of 4 on my team that are looking at this. You'll get 4 different opinions. We have Golder, who have worldwide resources. I mean, it's a lot of peer review. There's many ways to do this. So we're trying to take the best and the brightest brains in the world and come up with the best solution we can. Having said that, we're always open to that dialogue. It's something we can look at. With regard to the spillways themselves, though, adding spillways is not a recommendation because of the fact that means you have more water on the road. So we're trying to find a way to get water off the road. Every time we have water on the road, you're going to have continual degradation, and the safety factor of the slope itself is going to decline, so that's not a good thing. The long-term recommendation, which Golder has suggested, is we eliminate spillways. We've got, they would like to see that, and to change the management of the water. So those are all the details that we're going to look at on the long-term solution.
With respect to the short-term solution at the west end of the road, I would again ask, whether it's spillways or not, that some attention be paid to how to remove the water from those properties. There would be a very, very significant distance of overland flow to get that water away from there. Should it, historically in the last couple of years, there hasn't been water there, but should it be there, it will be a significant property damage. And the last, sorry, I do have one more thing, and that would be, we do have some wall failures out there right now, and I would suspect that it's possible that that will continue as they're scouring, and as there's no access to those spots, I'd like the municipality to consider the fact that those failures will need some attention and some cooperation from the municipality, whether it's rubble fill or armoring or something, in order to preserve those properties should their walls fail, since we have no access to those. I also want to clarify, Tara had mentioned about insurance. Specifically, the issue is that if there's not fire protection, the ability for fire trucks to access those properties, that there may not be any insurance available at all to homeowners. I don't know what we could do about that, but that is a very significant problem should there be a fire. Thank you.
Just one more question online while Cheryl Mason comes to the podium. Kim Peck is asking, will property owners after the 6 to 8 week construction period be able to walk in and access their properties?
Mr. Kelly, I'm not sure if you're able to answer that question. If I could just, Judy, could you just repeat it, please?
Sure. Will property owners after the 6 to 8 weeks of construction be able to walk in and access their properties?
I think, Mr. Mayor, the road will still be closed at that time. So still in the same way, we won't be able to allow anyone in onto where the current road is. But in 6 to 8 weeks' time, I'm hopeful that we can, we'll be taking a look at it at that time to determine perhaps whether a walkway can be created or something. I think also by that time, again, my colleague, Mr. Kelly, should speak to it, is hopefully we'll have a phase 2 plan in consideration or determined by council so that we'll know where we're moving forward.
Okay. Just a friendly reminder, anyone who has cell phones, if we can just turn those to mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. Next speaker is Cheryl Mason. On deck is Arnott Fryer. Is Cheryl here?
There is a Cheryl Mason here. She says she doesn't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Arnott Fryer. On deck will be Ted Reitberger.
Mr. Mayor, Council, ladies and gentlemen, Arnott Fryer from lovely downtown Erie. We've had a lot of information here to digest, and I think most of my questions I'll wait until the 3rd, and I'll be at that meeting. But one question that I have outstanding right now is, you've declared an emergency for the Dike Road, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, that's correct.
So the property between 17 and 1800s, the addresses that were on the board, is there access to the water there at all?
Your Worship, if I could offer one clarification. The actual declaration of an emergency was that larger orange area that is being displayed right now. The recommended evacuation that we had was along the addresses on Erie Shore Drive, because that's where the construction is going to take place. But that entire region is orange, and I think it was addressed in a previous question. Whether somebody chooses to evacuate or not is going to be largely dependent on what their current condition is. Imagine someone that might be on a dialysis treatment that goes to the hospital 2 or 3 times a week. If we had a breach and they were on an island, that type of treatment would be very difficult to get. Somebody else with different types of resources or resiliency might choose to feel like they could stay in an island setting even if there was the road inhibited. So to be really clear, where we're asking for the evacuation is on the addresses that were identified on Erie Shore Drive, where the construction will take place. Other people inside that orange area may choose to seek other accommodations because of their own personal circumstances.
Okay, my further question is, in that 1709 something to 18, is there actual right of way or through a property that construction could get in there and put in some concrete to help the area? Because we can't afford to have a breakthrough. That's for sure. And if they could get in and put in concrete, and concrete will break up the waves. Steel wall, it bounces. Concrete will break the waves into smaller and not as dangerous. So what I'm thinking is that if we could get in there, I did a little bit of running around today, and there are a few construction sites in our area. Clark's, for instance, has some big chunks of concrete that if the city was to go after them and get them to take that in tomorrow, that would be I think something that should be considered, because this is an emergency. So anyway, please think about that, and we'll see you on the 3rd.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ted Reitberger, and on deck is Susan O'Brien.
No questions.
Thank you. Next is Susan O'Brien. On deck is Craig Atwell. Both have left? Okay, last speaker is John Dusdorf. There he is.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Council, everyone. I'm from Erie, so most of my questions will be for part 2 and part 3. Being in construction and maintenance all my life, I have great confidence in this proposal for one will work. So I'm looking forward to the next phase. And one thing I see all the time as I drive in Erie and you turn on the Mariners Road, the first 3 houses there, you see the waves are starting to get closer and closer to those houses. And soon, that could be over there, and both Mariner Road and then Ross Road would be underwater. So that's a phase. And looking further down the road is because that's not only a Chatham-Kent problem, we also have that problem will be probably across everywhere on the Great Lakes. So I was wondering if the mayors and the premiers could get together with the, say, the city mayors of in Ohio State, Michigan State, New York, and work out a plan how they can control the water flow. For example, so they could, silly thing is put up a dike at the mouth of the St. Clair River, control how much water flows down St. Clair. You might be able to lower Lake Erie a little bit. And looking forward to it, because it only seems to be getting worse and worse. So that's about it.
Thank you. I understand Sue and Craig are in the room now, so Sue, please come forward.
I'm Sue O'Brien. I live on 18250 Erie Shore Drive. I've lived there over 25 years. And so it's very concerning that we're just at this point now, because we have been in discussion with the municipality 1997 when the Todgeman case report came out. And it's been left and left and left. So now we're at this point. My home is my investment, my lifetime investment. And you're telling me you're going to put blocks across the front of it, and the water is going to eventually take away our homes. It already is, and there are people with steel walls, etc. There have been other, and maybe you can speak to this. There was a special advisor appointed to the ministry. I think of MNR, but I'm not sure if that's the ministry. He went into and met with people of IRCA, and they made a recommendation that the province lends the municipality money so that they can do shoreline protection and fix the flooding, and they would accrue it over their taxes, the ratepayers, everybody that's benefiting. It would be accrued and paid back to the municipality. Essex County, Libro Bank actually lent them money to also support home shoreline protection. And then we look at the County of Lambton, who has Lakeshore Boulevard underwater, crumbling. And my neighbor, who lives in Brights Grove, said there's $6 million worth of armor stone behind his house, protecting the road from the lake. So there are some people out there doing it. So when I hear there's no funding, there's no nothing, it really makes me wonder if maybe we should be doing our references to other communities and how they're doing it, dealing with it. I also want to mention the brilliant idea of putting the blocks on the road, first and foremost, creates a lot of weight, which causes pressure. And while you're flooding our homes out, the water is seeping under the road through the grass and the soil. And we had an engineer back in '97 that said any additional weight will expedite that erosion because it's pushing, and then the water flow starts to seep through. So it will breach. You're working on the slopes for the drainage for the drain, but there's also water coming through the properties, under the pavement, under the asphalt. And I think that needs to be something that needs to be recognized. The other thing I'd like to say is that, this isn't an inconvenience. Like, I'd ask any one of you counselors to think, where are you going to go to live tomorrow? What, geez, like, what are you going to watch on TV tomorrow night, Mary Latimer? Maybe I'll stay with you. It's not an inconvenience. It is a total devastation of my home. I have a dog. I have family. Unfortunately, they don't have room for me. So, and I've got a 4-bedroom home put in storage somehow, which I'm hoping that you will. We have a mortgage, so once we leave that property, I'm sure that the water will eventually destroy it, because it's that high. I mean, we've had welders coming down to put the caps back on our steel wall, so it does require continual maintenance. And if you take that away from us, we can't even maintain. And if you take away the properties, then you don't have any barriers for that dike coming at it, the lake coming at it. And then, when the engineers or Golder was looking at the saturation levels in that, did they try a corner of the dike when you first come on? When you first come on, there's a curve, which I believe is municipal land, which is maybe that high above the water. Waves are splashing over to a lower field right at the corner. Has that ever been looked into? Because certainly that could breach there quite easily. So I guess that's it. I agree with Trevor. I'm probably one of the few, or maybe one of many, that the fact that you are passing a motion that is negatively impacting on my life and my property and my assets, I wonder what's the accountability on behalf of the municipality. I really question that you can do this and totally disrupt and ruin our homes. My husband works 6 miles from where we live. Now, I don't know where we're going to live. There is nothing to rent in the immediate area. Blenheim has no rentals that I'm aware of. Plus, I pay a mortgage. So for me, it's probably walk away, declare bankruptcy. That seems to be the option. And then there's going to be a lot of banks that are probably holding mortgages down there that will be definitely impacted. Plus, you lose $1.3 million worth of rate taxes, because that's what that dike contributes to the municipality of Chatham-Kent. I guess I've got nothing else to say, but, this isn't something new. We told you in '97 it's not if it's going to breach, it's when it's going to breach. And we were told, and when Thomas talked about, Mr. Kelly talked about putting a drain on the north side, I was here in 2016. Council unanimously approved that. Tim Dick did the RFP, request for proposals, to have it done. No engineers responded, went back to telling us to put pumps and pump the water back into the lake. There was also second part of that motion that said that they wanted the staff to look into the viability or cost analysis, meet with the stakeholders, and talk about a long-term plan. That never happened. So I know that our board's been working very diligently and supportive of the municipality. I had to quit because I couldn't retain that relationship, because I have lost a lot of respect for this municipality. And that, I really hope that legally you have the right to do this. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Craig Atwell. Is he here now? He's gone? Okay. That's it, Mayor.
Any other last call for any other questions? Yes, please.
I'm Steve Maynard. I'm an Erie Shore Drive resident. Have been on that property and that lake for 63 years plus. And keeping with the context of the state of emergency and the urgency to shore up the dike, I got to question the validity and the reasoning behind adding all the extra weight on top of that dike, as Sue had mentioned. And then I wonder why we could not access the property to the north of it, being the farmlands. Has there been any talk with them to use that right-of-way to shore up the dike, as opposed to adding the weight on top and possibly adding potential for collapse? You've mentioned in your studies that the road surface is cracking and they're getting larger, and that there are many cracks along the north slope of the dike, and that it's very saturated. So again, putting that weight on there just doesn't make sense to me. When I go near a creek or a precipice that's saturated, and I'm on the edge of a creek or something, my weight usually makes me fall right in the creek under those circumstances of saturation, erosion, and I just don't understand why we're here forcing this all onto the residents and cutting off that property when there could be access from the farmland. No one has mentioned that. And you're talking about farmers should be willing at some point to allow access for phase one to shore up that dike without adding the extra burden onto the good people that have been protecting that farmland for over 50 years. It's disgusting. This discussion has taken this turn all night. And to me, following this situation for over 40 years, that I knew there were problems with the dike, and being residents there, that it seems that you're all hell-bent on getting the residents off of that dike. And that just totally blows me away. I strongly urge you to consider, and I propose here tonight, that you look further at getting the farm owners online with this project to allow that dike to be shored up in the emergency situation of the March 9th that you're talking about, and let the property owners take care of the back end of their places so that together that dike can be shored up. Thank you.
April, I have one more quick question from online. Sorry.
Could I respond to a couple things? So thank you, Steve, for the comments. I wanted to remark that, first of all, on the work regarding the farmland, that's exactly one of the solutions we're looking at. And that was in the longer term solution. So maybe I didn't make that so clear, but that's the potentially moving the municipal drain to the north. Of course, there's another alternative, as you described, is looking at it from the south as well. So those are absolutely part of our phase 2 plans. What doesn't work for us right now is that in order to move that drain, that's a significant amount of work. We have to purchase the land or have access to the land. We have to build a new drain first, and then we build up the road. And so the timing just doesn't work. That's the issue, is to do that type of work, we're looking at 6 to 8 months at least, and this short term puts us in better position. It's less expensive for one thing. Number two is that we can do it much faster. So our plan is, let's take some short-term actions. Let's try to stabilize what we have out there. And then, absolutely, we're working on exactly what you described as an option for council to consider. The second point you made was the weight. That's one reason we are moving the blocks to the south, is that there's more stability to the south. That's been a recommendation. We're concerned as well. But more importantly, what's causing us the issues right now is the water on the road. And that road is in tension. With tension, again, that's a torsional failure. It's being pulled apart. And that's one of the reasons we're moving that weight to the south. So I think we're aligned with your comments. And I just wanted to assure you, we're absolutely looking at that. The issue is just the timing. We couldn't get that work done fast enough on the drain.
My comments were directed strictly at phase one. I understand phase two, but for the emergency situation, as opposed to putting that weight and that equipment on top of the dike, whatever you're going to do for phase one, do it from the farm side. Is that not possible? If you're going to build up the top of that dike and the back slope, I don't see how you can build up the top without building up the back slope somewhat as well. So just do phase one from the farm side and let that road stay open. That was my proposal, not for the long term of phase two.
So I wanted to make sure, are we saying, see the top right picture? So that's what we're seeing, see the blocks that are in the center there, they're moving to the left, and then we're working from the farm side or from the north side of the road to fill in the clay. We think we'll be in a lot better position then, so you're moving some of that weight to the north or to the south, and the actual density or the weight per square meter is much less with the clay. Are we, is it, and maybe we can talk offline after, or if you're going to be there Tuesday?
It just seems to me that the farms could be involved a little more, and that weight could be kept off that road and kept it open. That's all I'd like to see considered for phase one. Thank you.
Last online question, I think it's directed to you, April. Can state of emergency people who are not in the evacuation zone get help with social services for relocation?
Through you, Mayor Kenneth. Judy, can you just repeat that whole question again?
Can state of emergency people who are not in the evacuation zone get help with social services for relocation?
So what I would recommend, anyone that is in the state of emergency zone, if they feel that they cannot shelter in place, to contact us on the numbers that we've provided. And we have those now, I understand, up on the website as well. And case managers will work with them to provide them with all of the information necessary to make plans.
Councillor Crew, you had a question?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just had one question about state of emergency. Is there a benefit to us declaring a state of emergency, making it official?
Thank you, Worship. There are several things it does for us. Even effective tonight, the state of emergency is also indicative that there's increased risk to people, health and safety. And we have agonized over a lot of the same issues that have been raised by the residents. It's a terrible situation where we have to ask people to be moved out of their homes. But it's a worse condition if we feel like someone's going to lose their life. Right. So I'm going to keep coming back to that. We will do everything we can to try and take into consideration these other issues. But the state of emergency allows us a number of things. One is it does allow for the evacuation order. It also allows us to take some special, if we needed access to some property or easements or so on, it provides some additional access to those issues. We can also look at expediting some of our regular purchasing issues. I mean, those are three just immediate examples. There's been a number of very concrete recommendations here tonight and requests for some additional assistance that we're going to take back again. I'd like to echo Thomas's comments that the association, the Residents Association, has been extraordinarily collaborative and trying to do what they can to try and deal with it. We'll continue to work with them on this. We're caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of trying to make sure that we stabilize things immediately so we still have an opportunity for some of those long-term solutions, which we know the residents want.
Okay.
They want an opportunity to stay there. That's what we're trying to get to as well.
And I just have a comment. We realize that this is not an inconvenience. I don't think there's one person sitting around here. This is your homes, your livelihood. You've invested your life's work into these places and really been good stewards of the shoreline. And I don't think there's one person around here that isn't feeling your pain. I want to commend you all for your professionalism. I don't think I could have got up there, even though there were some emotional things. I don't think I could have been as professional as you all have been. And I really commend you for that. And I commend you for your suggestions and working with us. I think that I don't know what the outcome will be. I don't know what the answer is going to be. But if, this is a horrible situation. And like Councillor Foss said, I don't think, he hasn't seen anything like this. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. So I really want to commend you. And I really appreciate all of you coming out on a Friday night to let us know and educate us about exactly what you're facing and letting us know how what a good community you are to work together with us to find a solution. And I hope it's shorter than longer, but you have my promise that I'll work hard, and I don't think this is an inconvenience.
Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we've had a very thorough discussion for about 2.5 hours. We've learned a lot. We've heard well from the residents, both on the Erie Shore Drive and others who will be affected in Erie O and other in the general area. I think it's now time that we take this information back. This was new to the councillors. We didn't have the reports either, by the way. We just knew there was a meeting. And I think it's now time that we adjourn the meeting and go home and think about this over the weekend, because there's no decisions to be made tonight, but Monday at 6 o'clock, the decision times will come. So I don't know whether you want a motion in that regard or how you're going to approach it, but I think that's,
I will just I'll make some closing comments, and then I'll open the motion for adjournment. So I've taken a lot of notes during this, and certainly, I think Councillor Crew basically just read my notes. I couldn't have said it better myself as far as what she summarized, as far as we take it very seriously here. I've watched dozens of people here the last 24 hours, basically a lot of them working all hours of the morning to make sure to deal with this, and they will be doing this moving forward. They're caring, they're dedicated, so we take this very seriously. We want this to be a positive outcome in the end state for all of us. So we're going to work hard towards that. I know it's very hard right now, and I can't really imagine what it would feel like. I truly can't. So we want to work hard towards making this a situation in the long run we can look back and say we did it the right way. So with that, I just want to let everyone know there is a copy of the presentation on the website, as well as there's some paper copies on the way out. And can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, March 2nd, 2020, and that the Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Seconded by Councillor Oche. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.